The guest is Dr. David Padgett, who is the professor of geography in the Department of History, Geography, and Political Science at Tennessee State University. Dr. Padgett, before we had our second break, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to simply enlighten our audience about some of the factual information that you found through your study of the Census 2000. Let's give you an opportunity to do that. Anything that you think might be of some interest to us dealing with this census?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's going to take at least about 3 years before we get all of the census count completed. Some of the first numbers are coming out now, such as the total nations count and some of the more broad categories. But what we get from the census are also employment data, educational attainment data, family and housing data, all kinds of information on the population that can be very useful. And so we can also look at things information such as how fast populations are growing. For example, African American population is growing about twice the rate of the white population. Also, we can learn from the census today that the average African American family is larger than white families. We also know that by and large the African American population is younger than the white population. And so all of these pieces of data can give us a profile of the African American community that can tell us other things, and perhaps guide us towards some of the things that we might be needing in the future that might be different from other sectors of the population. Also, with regard to educational attainment, I mean, right now, African Americans, about 14.5% of African Americans have a college degree, as opposed to whites who have about twice that number. So there's an educational gap that you can see from the census. The income gap, the average white household earns about $10,000 more than the average African American household. You can also get data on net worth or wealth. The average white family has 10 times the net worth as the African American families, which to a large degree is attributed to the gap in home ownership. Approximately nearly 70% of whites are homeowners, as opposed to about 40-some-odd% of African Americans. So this is some other information that we can get from the census. Now, most of the information I'm telling you now is from projections that are done through statistical methods where we kind of extrapolate through time what we would expect to see according to the last census enumeration that occurred in 1990. It's going to be very interesting to see some of the things that we're going to see in this most recent census. But those numbers are going to take about 3 years to tumble out. Another interesting piece of data that we see also in this upcoming census is just with regard to where we are. There's a large concentration of African Americans, of course, in the southern states. Then the next largest population outside the South is New York, with about 3.2 million African Americans. And then there are about 2.5 million African Americans in the state of California. So we can look at where we are, and then we can look at some of the socioeconomic trends in those regions, and we might find that there's a correlation between low educational attainment, or we might even find that there's a correlation between certain types of physical and health problems and where African Americans are, and that might help us develop health policy. Perhaps we can guide resources into those communities where we see that there's a high incidence of African Americans and certain types of cancer, perhaps informational campaigns. So there are lots of things that we can do with these data, and there are lots of interesting facts that you can only get from the census that you might not find anyplace else.
I think, Dr. Padgett, we also know that you work for, well, at least you write for one of the local publications, and that you've done quite a bit of work on the census dealing with relationships, especially among African American male-female. And I raise this question to give you an opportunity to talk about this, because I think that when you look into higher education, you find that there are more females than males and et cetera, and all of these things will have something to do with the social relationships between African American males and African American females. Let's have you to sort of talk about that.
Yes, I write for Urban Flavor, and which is a new publication here directed toward the African American community. My column is entitled, well, I write a column that really focuses upon urban growth issues. And so one of the themes the magazine had one week was upon relationships. And so I looked at the census data for the Nashville metropolitan area and just looked at the numbers of single males versus number of single females, number of single African American males versus number of single African American females. And, you know, here in our community, we have about a 25% African American population, which adds up to about 280,000 or so total, of which about half of that number are adults, of which about half of that number are married, and the other half is single. So now you're at about 70,000. Now you got to look at the number of people who are living by themselves, no children, no other people living there, because even though people might be single, there might be other people in the household. And so what you wind up with is a very small number of single, uninvolved African Americans in this community. And so I pointed out that, you know, the numbers show that if you are single and unattached in this community, that you might have a very small pool from which to select folks, and that perhaps you should consider, you know, that if you are black and live in this community, that you should consider traveling, that you should perhaps consider attending conferences, look through Black Enterprise magazine, look at the conference schedule. If you are an accountant, maybe you should consider attending your national Black Accountants meeting. If you're an engineer, go to your NSBE National Conference, and you might meet someone there who is of a like mind, who has common interests. Now, you might end up in a long-distance relationship, but you know, I've seen several of those work out just fine.
But what you're saying here as we get ready for the second commercial break is that it's going to be very, very difficult for a single African American to